Good morning. My name's James Haywood and I'm one of the co-founders of Off2Class. Off2Class is a site that provides great ESL content, whether you're teaching online or in person in a classroom. So please feel free during the webinar or after to go onto the site and you can sign up and have a look at the content we've got there. But for today, what I'm going to do is go through IELTS, and specifically I want to address teachers who are new to IELTS and thinking about taking students on, or perhaps you've got a couple of students and need a few pointers to head in the right direction with them. So hopefully they're the aims of this presentation. For most of you, you'll probably already be familiar with the fact that IELTS is an extremely popular test and it's also growing in popularity. Currently around 2 million candidates, it's sat by approximately 2 million candidates every year worldwide, and it's certainly gaining in popularity. It's now become one of the foremost standardized tests, and it's used by government departments for immigration purposes, such as the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. And it's also used by an increasingly large number of educational institutions to apply for courses. Not exclusively, but it's certainly gaining ground everywhere. It teaches the four competencies, or it tests the four competencies of reading, listening, writing, and speaking, which I think is a very effective part of this test. And I'm also going to just say that in my personal opinion, IELTS students, or when you get an IELTS student, and it's the first time you've had one, they are a little bit different to the average ESL student. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way, but I think there are some differences to these students. And that comes down to the fact of them having often taken the test already, and they're in a very well prepared position, or sometimes a better prepared position than the teacher is. Similarities and differences, as you know, between the academic and the general modules. I'm going to touch on those today. The differences aren't great, but they are worth pointing out. So, an IELTS student. What is an IELTS student? First of all, they're generally very well prepared. On average, the candidates sit the test 2.3 times. Statistically, I guess it's either 2 or 3 real, but what you need to know is that when you get an IELTS student, it's very possible that the student has already sat the test. You need to know a lot about that test, because if you're trying to convert that possible prospective student to a paying student, as an IELTS teacher, you need to be very aware of what that student has already gone through. If you don't know the scoring system, if you don't know the structure of the test, if you don't know the external factors that, the student went through to get to the test that day, you're not in a great position, because they will already have a score. They'll know a lot about the answers, that the questions that they answered during the test. They already know where they think they went wrong, and so they are often extremely well prepared. So this is my way of making you forewarned and forearmed before you take them. Very good website to go to, obviously, is the official IELTS website. The reason I'm pointing you here is because there's just extremely valuable information for teachers. You can go on and find demographic statistics. So again, forewarned, forearmed, when you're speaking to your student, if they're a Bengali student or an Arabic speaking student, or if the student has Turkish as his or her first language, or the student's taking the test in Australia or China, you can find out across the competencies what the averages are for these students across demographics, and also the reason for which students are taking the test. So if a candidate is taking the test for work purposes or for immigration purposes, there are a whole lot of others, which I can't remember at the moment, you should take advantage of that and go on, and that really strikes a chord with the student when they have some idea about, this teacher knows something about the test, and not only about the test, about the demographic that I'm in myself. I think I've mentioned in previous webinars that I teach almost exclusively Turkish students. That is my niche, and I find that while they do quite well in speaking, just being a very warm, open, and conversational kind of culture, and I mean that in a very positive sense, they often do quite poor in writing, and I don't know whether that's due to the education system they have had previously, or whether it's just the structure of the language. Turkish is extremely different from English. I know that's a relative term, but there are just no similarities in the way that Turkish written language between Turkish written language and English language. So it's good to know those statistics before you take IELTS students on. One really important thing about IELTS students and any student taking a standardized test is going to be that there is an end date. They know when they're going to sit that test. As a teacher, that gives you a lot of scope to work backwards. If you're sitting the test in 2 months' time, then immediately you can start to set up the time frame. You know the time frame. You can start to set up the scheduling, the amount of lessons, and it puts you in a very good position. But remember, the student has an outcome, and that's where you need to manage those expectations. The student's going to come to you with a previous score and obviously want to improve that. That's why they're here. Be very careful about how definite you think you can get students to. There are a lot of people out there who know a lot about IELTS. I'm reluctant and actually reticent to even say to a student, I'm going to get you to a 7. You just don't know. I wouldn't manage the expectations in that way. What you can do is find the students' weaknesses and the areas that they find challenging and assist them with that, but be very aware that people's immigration status and entrance to universities depend on the IELTS test, and I don't think as an IELTS teacher it's particularly wise to tell a student that your outcome in the next test with me is going to be a 7. I think you're stepping in into a minefield there. The reason I mentioned the cost on this slide, it's currently around US $230 in September 2016. It's an expensive test, it's not given, but perhaps expensive being relative, it's a very well organized test. The companies who put this together, Cambridge and IDP, do a great job. It requires a very large number of staff, it requires facilities, and it requires great materials, which are in the test itself. I think the test is of an extremely high standard. My point about the test being $230 is if you're a teacher and you're going to teach IELTS to a student for $5, it's going to be very unrewarding, and I just don't know why you're going to do it. Students are doing this with an outcome that's already costing them a fair amount of money. If they're going to be an international student or they're going to immigration purposes, I think as a teacher you should be using this and putting in the effort to be a great IELTS teacher and use that to market yourself to make a little bit of money. No teacher goes into education, nobody goes into education anyway to make a lot, but be fair on yourself and don't undervalue IELTS product. That's all the point I want to make there. On to the next slide. So standardized tests, as I mentioned, you have a measurable outcome. So the students will know very much what they already have. They'll know what they have across each of the competencies, and they'll certainly know what they need to get into the university of their choice. Also on the IELTS webpage, you can go in and find out, once you've found out from the students the university they want to go to, you can, or the immigration score, you can go in and actually find out the score that they need. It's great. The students will possibly know that, but maybe not. On this slide, my personal opinions. The IELTS candidates I have, on the whole, tend to be well educated. They certainly possess strong analytical skills, and they often have a higher level of critical thinking than a lot of ESL students. Again, that has been my experience. I'm sure there's research that probably doesn't back that up, but that's, as an online ESL teacher, that certainly has been my experience with the students. There are patterns to this test. It's a standardized test, so don't feel bad about teaching the test or teaching the formula. Students are coming to you because they want to get a higher band, and often they already have high proficiency in English. Just teach the structure of the test, teach the question types. There's nothing wrong with it. Previous tests are available for practice. I don't know the latest websites because I've built my own content, but there are a lot of good, you only have to Google it and you'll find the free materials out there if you want them. Obviously, Cambridge itself prints a lot of good materials. I have some reservations about using full tests as a way to teach the test. I think you need to break it down into chunks, but there are certainly great materials out there. Practice makes perfect does work here. You can be very repetitious with the way that you teach. I teach it like a boot camp when I do IELTS. Everything's down to time, question type, and get the answer out, and then we move on. So I don't let students kind of wander off on a path with IELTS. It's a little bit tougher with me. I don't think you need a communicative or a flipped classroom here. It's not about the students' needs. It is about the students' needs, but you don't have to be so airy-fairy about it, okay? Get down to the nuts and bolts. You've got to get them through. They've got an end date, and that's what they want. As a minimum, you certainly need to know when your student's going to sit the exam. Okay, as I said before, that's a logical thing. You can work back and work out your timetable. Where your student's going to sit the exam. The reason I mention this is it's really important to have a connection with your student. And on the IELTS website, you can find out where that student's going to sit the test. Before the day, there are going to be all these external factors. You know, everybody has a life. There are other things going on. How are they going to get there on the day? What's it going to be like? You know, do they need to take a bus, a train? What should they take with them in case, you know, something goes a little bit wrong? You know, should they leave their phone at home? They're the kind of things, the physical location, even if you're teaching online, that really help a student understand that you have some empathy for what's going on. It's, you know, the IELTS test doesn't take place in a vacuum, and everybody gets exam jitters, or most of us do. So I think it's good to know where the student sits the exam. It adds a little bit of realness to the student and the connection between you and the student. Manage the student's expectations. Again, I really believe I would never tell a student what I think they're going to come out with in the exam. I think it's unfair, and it's a natural human instinct in most of us anyway to be very positive. Oh, of course you're going to come out with that. If you're going to be real, tell the student what you really think. Don't just tell them that they're going to get a 7 or 8. It's for many people it's unachievable even after 3 or 4 attempts at IELTS. Data I've mentioned here. There are a couple of websites. Both of them are on the IELTS.org, but there's plenty of material on there. Those 2 URLs just take you to test taker performance and the demographic data. Test structure is always the same, and as far as I know, it has never altered. Listening comes first, followed by reading, writing, and at some point later on the same day, the student will have a 15-minute speaking test. Again, this is how I run the lessons as well. Same structure and time management. There are 3 things that I believe you can really assist an IELTS student with. One is time management. Some students are excellent, or they think they're great at managing time, but they're also a student who thinks they have to answer every question in order and they just can't move on. That's bad time management. IELTS gives you 30 minutes. They don't repeat any recordings, whether that's good, bad, or otherwise. They just don't, for example, in listening. So if you've got 10 questions and your student's stuck on number 2 and is trying to work out what they heard previously, and the recording is now at question 5, you're failing that. We're not failing, sorry, there's no fail. You're not going to get those marks. So one of the things you can really help out with is time management. Secondly, the identification of question types. This is a weakness not just in students, but also in teachers when they teach IELTS. Other teachers that I know are often oblivious to all the different types of question types and then the strategies that the students need to have in order to answer those questions, to recognize those questions in the test and then know their little strategy for answering that question type as quickly as possible. Reading the instructions is vital in IELTS. I know as teachers we always tell students to read instructions, but if you do not read the instructions here, you will miss parameters that I think when I sat the IELTS test myself, I missed because I didn't get a perfect score, or I didn't get band 9. And I think the mistakes that I made were due to me misreading questions. So that's something that you can really assist with. Okay, on to the next slide. The third thing I think is teach the skills. Vocabulary and grammar, of course they are important, but if you're taking a student on who's less than B1, I think you need to question the student's motivation and your motivation for doing this. Get students to a B1 before you take them on for IELTS, because I don't think any candidate for IELTS is looking to get a 3 or a 4. So take on a B1, get them to sit a placement test, and keep all of that aside. So teach IELTS as a separate thing, and then if the student has noticeable weaknesses in grammar, structure, and in vocabulary, test that stuff outside of the IELTS lesson. It's still valid, and we all have weaknesses in areas of grammar and vocabulary. So if the student has weaknesses with phrasal verbs, you can pick up with that, but not during the teaching of the skills. Teaching IELTS, the skills required in the IELTS exam is foremost here. This is what you need to do. So There are lots of skills, by the way, that you need in IELTS. One, you know, the old listening for specific purposes. You need to be able to find keywords. Identifying opinions can be quite difficult or challenging for students, certainly at lower proficiencies. Reading for gist, and the all-important paraphrasing. When you have paraphrasing and the distractors that appear in IELTS, distractors are heavily used, I think, and for good reason, in the IELTS exam. You need to make sure that these are the skills that you are teaching to your student, because these are the skills that help them receive better marks in the test. IELTS exam materials are not authentic, but in my opinion, they are about as close as you're ever going to find in a test environment. They're very impressive. A lot of effort has obviously gone into making them, but remember, they are graded in some sense. So if you're going to use your own materials or come onto my site and use, our site and use the Off2Class IELTS materials, of course they're not authentic. They've been graded so that they are still accessible for a C1 student or a high proficiency student, but they are graded because if there's a technical term, it's always shown in an IELTS test in a small glossary. It's rare that it happens, but there will be one or two words in a reading or a reading activities that will be shown in a glossary. So the material is graded. Appropriate length is really important, and I mentioned that earlier. If you do decide to go with material such as a Cambridge book and you're going through practice tests can be overwhelming, because that reading material, or if you're doing a reading lesson, you're going to do some skills, you've got texts in front of you that are very long, and you want to keep it at an appropriate length. That's my only kind of warning about using kind of practice tests. The whole thing is that as a teacher, you need to manage and let the student not be freaking out when they say, oh my God, I've got another 1,000-word, text to read. So make your exercises manageable. That comes down to listening as well. You don't want to be doing a 5-minute activity each time that you're doing that, listening with a student. Appropriate style. IELTS has context, and in the lessons that I provided, I always get the students need to understand and look for the keys in the context. So for example, in the listening activities, is it a conversation? Is it a monologue? And they will hear both. Formal and informal are very important for the speaking test. And of course, for the writing, you want to be looking at discursive and argumentative. Are you presenting a balanced argument, or is it just your opinion piece when you're writing? Content, you need to use appropriate content, so avoid all of the normal things. Political and religious stuff never, as far as I know, comes up in IELTS. They keep it very kind of bland and politically correct, which they have to. They love history. I know they love historical stuff, or reporting on new scientific discoveries is always a good thing as well, but keep it pretty easy so that you can use it across nationalities and cultures. That's important. My experience as a candidate was interesting. As I said, I didn't get full marks. I got 8.5. Extremely disappointed actually, as a native speaker and also as an ESL teacher. I hadn't studied for the test. Still doesn't really give me an excuse. I wasn't nervous, but you need to be aware that candidates are. But I will say, humans are involved. It wasn't run as well as I expected. The person who came to the IELTS room to let us all register on the day, it ran 40 minutes late. So I had a bunch of nervous, non-native speaking ESL students sitting for their exam, and I couldn't quite believe that somebody came 40 minutes late on a rainy day in Sydney to open up the door. I made a complaint at the end, because not only did that happen, but the students came in and the woman kind of just started shouting at them, telling them to organize themselves. I thought it was a bit poor, actually, the organization. I'm sure that doesn't happen very often, but be aware, on the day, humans are involved. The other thing that happened was the recording. They were recording, the woman came up and interrupted the recording within the first 2 seconds. The same person. So I sort of said I thought it was pretty poor at the end that this would occur. I mean, students are paying a lot of money, they're nervous. So be very aware. By the way, IELTS does do a great job. I'm not bagging them. I want you to understand, as the teacher, you need to be very empathetic to what the student's going to go through on the day. Mistakes do happen, or there's a little bit of disorganization perhaps, and that makes you even more nervous and anxious, in a test where everything is timed. So let's get on to the 4 skills. First of all, listening section is the same for academic and general. There will be 4 listening activities. shouldn't call them activities, for listening sections, they become gradually more difficult. Although as a native speaker, I often actually don't find that they are. I'm not very good at differentiating between where they would actually belong. The recordings are played once only. Drill that into your students, because there's always some hope, I think, that resides in candidates that they will actually be able to hear them again. And this goes back to students who can't move through without they can't miss a question. If you've got a student who can't miss a question, there's somebody who thinks that the recording is going to be played a second time for them. So that's quite important. Section 4, the last recording that you will hear, will be the most difficult one. It's a monologue on an academic topic. It has a pause in the middle, so you can prepare students for that. It's nice to take a breath during that one. I can't remember the topic of part 4 when I sat the test, but it was difficult enough that I enjoyed that 30-second pause that came in with some new instructions. The main things that students need to understand in the listening section is that maps, diagrams, and plans. It's interesting, maps, diagrams, and plans are something that we use every single day of our lives. I know that I'm not great, my spatial intelligence isn't high. When I get out of an underground metro or subway, I'm always looking at the plan, can work it out and follow my way. But of course, when you're listening to someone give directions, and they are long directions, and they're taking you through an entire map, diagram, or plan, you need to have really good preposition skills, and you really need to be able to listen consistently and follow from the start point to where it goes on. So while we're good at reading them, IELTS is really good at testing whether we can follow directions and an instruction around a diagram. Notes, summaries, flowcharts, tables, and forms, they're all kind of an interpretation of the same thing. They're different ways of representing information. Flowcharts are the only ones I think that students need particular practice with. Notes, tables, and forms are summaries are something as students they will be familiar with anyway, but interestingly, just underneath, short answer and sentence completion questions can be a little bit confusing for students, because the answers can either be ungrammatical, just a little phrase, or it needs to be grammatical in a sentence completion question, and hence how I emphasized before that question types are vital for you as the IELTS tutor. Multiple choice questions are challenging in IELTS. There's a lot of material to read. If you think it's just, give me the date that he wants to join and there'll be 3 days underneath, it's rarely that. There's usually quite a lot to read in the options. The other interesting point is that in multiple choice questions in IELTS, you will often hear each of the answer options. So everybody, human natural instinct is to tick the first one you hear in listening, and then suddenly you'll hear the second one and the third one, and you won't have realized they've put these paraphrasing or a distractor in, and there was a however or not, or the one speaker corrected the other about the first option. Too late to go back. So be very aware. This comes back to reading instructions before listening to the text or starting the reading materials. Matching questions are challenging as well. You'll get 2 sets of information, 2 lists, and you need to match them. So that's a good one. I've got an example here. Native accents. Okay, if all I'll really say is it's really, really important that your student can understand various accents. So get them onto online radio stations. There is something available. There are great ones in the United States. PBS, I think, gosh, that's probably so generic, but there is a US station which I find is great for listening to accents across the United States and all of North America. BBC, okay, where would we be without it? ABC for the Australian accent, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the New Zealand one that I look at, but there's a great one for New Zealand. As far as I know, South African accents aren't used in IELTS. It's 18 months since I sat the exam, so I'm unsure if that has been updated, but there's no reason that you can't. You should be, as a teacher in 2016, valuing every English on the planet, because if the world's, and I believe IELTS is going to become the world's most foremost English standardized test, is using English across the board, or standard Englishes across the board, as a teacher, you need to be giving that exposure to your student. Whether you understand where the speaker comes from or not is irrelevant. What you do need to understand is what the person is saying. You don't need to recognize where I'm from, where another speaker's from, you have to understand. It's all about comprehensibility. So that's enough on accents. Okay, the importance of reading instructions is important everywhere, but I will just say here what you really need to be aware of, for example, is the instructions that you'll have when getting an IELTS question. There are parameters, and it's really important, for example, that when a student is going to dive into this question, they're going to think, well, this bottom option fits in to the gap here because it's grammatically accurate, but the answer is wrong because it does not fit into the parameters of the question. And this is something that many students lose valuable marks on. I also suspect it's where I lost marks in the IELTS exam as well. So just make a point of reading instructions, not particularly in listening, but I found that listening and reading were where the instructions obviously are coming all the time. Choosing options from a list. If you're going to put together listening activities, this is an example one from one of the lessons on Off2Class that I've built. Doesn't have to be as as nice as this if you like. There's nothing wrong with getting out some A4 paper and having plans that work for you that you can use time and time again. It's very easy to pop them into PowerPoint. And if you like using our materials, you can use that as well. Obviously, you need to make a recording that goes with it, and that's something that we have done. So you can see here that the transcription pops up as well. And that I've put in for the teacher's benefit. You do need to have your transcription, although I don't let students see this because I don't see it as a listening activity if the student is just reading the text. Even after having done a listening activity, as I said, I don't let students read the transcription then either. This is the listening part that we are teaching, their listening skills. I don't particularly think it helps them. With reading, that's fine, they've got the test, but listening, as I said, it's run like a boot camp for me. Get on with the timing. If they failed, if they weren't able to get full marks in it, that's fine. Move on, all right, next time. There's nothing wrong with listening to it 2 or 3 times, but I keep the transcription out. On to the next kind of listening activity. Diagrams are quite challenging because they often use mechanical parts in the IELTS test, but that doesn't really matter because obviously things are going to be in the recording. It goes through in a very logical manner. There's not a huge amount I would like to say here, except that we often don't listen to other people describing diagrams on a daily basis, so it is something really worth practicing for students. Diagrams and plans more than maps in my opinion. Sentence completion questions are interesting because they need to be grammatically correct, and so whilst I've said keep grammar and vocabulary separate from the days that you're actually teaching the skills in IELTS, I will say that here, for example, you can see across the top I've got different forms of agree, a phrasal verb, we've got a gerund, we've got a noun, and also the adjective. Yep. And so I get the student to try to be a little bit elastic and show me the lexical resource that the student has to make these sentence completion questions. You can do it with any verb form that you have or noun. The idea is to show this, to get the student to use their elasticity with the language and some lexical resource there. If the students are particularly weak in that, I would go back to our lesson library. You go back to whatever resources you have and teach something around vocabulary if you need to. Selecting options are really important. In the multiple choice questions, I will just say again, IELTS, when teaching IELTS, make sure you are concentrating on paraphrasing for the listening activity, because the questions themselves those won't be the words. They're often not the words that the student will hear in the recording itself. They have been paraphrased and there are these great distractors in. So when you have a distractor, always be aware that it's a speaker who's saying something incorrect, but either that speaker will correct him or herself, or the other speaker, if there is in the conversation, will do it for the person. IELTS doesn't give you the IELTS recordings don't provide wrong information. If somebody says the capital of France is Madrid, they will always correct themselves in that recording, or the other speaker will, but that's the distractor. It's the wrong information given, and then you have to listen to hear the correct information. Natural human instinct, if Madrid was on the top of that list of the options, the student ticks it, or I would have ticked it, and goes on to the next question only to find that they're still talking about it. It's vital, again, paraphrasing, listening for distractors, and reading those instructions. Okay, the last one I want to mention, matching questions with several options. I really like teaching these because they allow me to do great listening activities. Students struggle with them a little bit. Often in the IELTS exam, you will have more choices available to you than what you need to use. So as you can see on the left here, we've got a choice of 6 groups of people. I think this text from memory is about a catering company that's serving for a big wedding event, and you need to match the personal people with the responsibilities. Obviously, you don't need to use them all, and make sure students are aware of that when they're doing the lessons with you. Going on to writing. Writing is slightly different for academic and general. I don't think it's something you need to spend a lot of time on. Perhaps using the word simpler is not fair, but the questions, the type of essay that the student will need to write in the general module in part 2 is simpler. It'll be something more general and less formal and academic than what will be required of students in the academic module. Other than that, it's still a discursive essay, so I think you should more or less be teaching it the same way, simply perhaps the level of language that you would, or the type of language, the register of language is not quite the same. In a lot of part 1, you'll be reporting on main features and comparisons, and this is something I really enjoyed teaching students with IELTS writing. By the way, if I didn't mention already, a lot of students will come to you saying writing is the only thing they need assistance with. Ignore that, okay? The skills are they complement each other. Don't just teach writing. A, unless that's what you love doing, it's boring, and B, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, they're all joined. They're not separate. So while I'm speaking, you're listening and probably reading at the same time. You might be taking some notes. Make sure students are doing the same thing, and please just don't concentrate on writing. However, writing the discursive essay, I don't like doing it particularly. I'm not very fond of writing a 4-part essay, but teach it to the student, okay? It can be quite formulaic. Some of you who are very natural teachers of writing, I'm envious. Again, maps, diagrams, and plans. It's not something we write about very often. So, well, perhaps once we're out of university we don't. I can't remember the last time I actually did it, unless I was doing something for Off2Class. Stating the introduction, stating the issue, so paraphrasing, it's important here as well. An introduction, supporting examples, and conclusion. It won't be anything new to the student, but really force this in a formulaic way over different lessons. Maybe one lesson you just concentrate on the perfect introductions. Second lesson might be just looking at presenting argument A, argument B, and then the conclusion. You'll work out the way to do it, but do it in a very structured and repetitive way. It really does work with writing. Logical reasoning, students they're under pressure in IELTS. There's a time limit for writing, and students need to make sure they don't push out garbage. You need to be super strict about this. If a student produces a sentence which is grammatically correct but illogical, or it doesn't go in sequence in the writing, get rid of it and be hard with them, because IELTS examiners aren't going to put up with something that just appears as a sentence, even if it's perfectly well written English. Be tough on that. Okay, coming into graphs, you'll need to look at the language of comparison. So it's not just saying that something is more than, okay, there's lots of different comparison language you can use, and you want to make sure that students are using words like notable, significant, negligible, vocabulary like that. So when you go through one of the test exams yourself, find that language yourself. Do one of the graphs or diagrams and maps, and think of the language that comes to you naturally. That's the language that you should be teaching the students. or getting them to use in their writing. The questions will always ask for the main point, the main features of the map, and then drill down into other features. And it'll be the same when describing a table. Everyone's, all your candidates will have familiarity with tables. We're all good at reading tables of information. It's just information presented a different way. Same with these graphs. When you're drilling down and providing more detail, what some of the questions you might get in writing will be a comparison, and these will generally be a comparison across time. So more vocabulary there over a period of X years ago, between X and Y. Okay, there's language that for and since. Okay, present perfect is going to come in here. Yeah, for sure, present perfect, and so language that will show comparison over time periods as well is really important. With the discursive essay, or you're going to want to do the A-B thing, so providing the one argument on one hand, and then the opposing argument or a counter argument, and then arguing those points by providing examples, personal experience, and coming out with the conclusion. That's the formula I use. You can obviously go in and find stuff that's more in depth, but I think IELTS in a sense is simple, and I don't know why the questions are always, they don't differ very much from test to test. So I think you just need to force this out, and I don't know why students are reticent or about to write, or they feel so down about it. Perhaps it is marked harder, I don't know, but I don't know. I don't think it's anything to get too worked up about. Reading is the one that I find is perhaps the most challenging. The lengths of the text can be extremely long. It is different for academic in general. I'm going to focus on academic today. There are parts 1, 2, and 3. The texts again are gradually more difficult. You do notice that in the reading. The last one for me was particularly challenging. You don't get a chance to read them from word 1 to the final word in the document. You just simply won't have enough time unless you're a speed reader. So skim reading, reading for gist are extremely important. Again, maps, diagrams, and plans. Notes, summaries, flowcharts, tables, and forms. You can see the similarities here between the reading and the listening component. Short answer and sentence completion questions, multiple choice questions, matching questions again. Matching features and headings are quite interesting. And I'll just say, if you get a matching headings, this question will always come before the text itself. So the student will be presented with perhaps 7 headings, and they will then see the text, which has 7 paragraphs. So that's the only question from memory that will come before the student sees the text itself. So make sure you do practice those. And identifying information. These can be quite tough in reading. There's no intonation, there's no stress, you don't have anything that you have with listening that, you know, really explains how the reader is feeling, the writer is feeling about it, so you need to have quite a strong vocabulary to pull out the writer's opinion. When you're teaching IELTS, I mentioned this, how much text do you use in the lesson? I would be, I am wary about using full IELTS practice tests. As I said, the IELTS text, I've typed a few of them out in my time just to see, and there are 1,000, they can be up to 1,000. I think the last one I typed was about 940, and the last one I did was about 1,100 words. That's extremely long to be using in a 40-minute lesson, I would say, and doesn't really give a student manageable tasks. If you're going to do the matching headings thing that I mentioned previously, that question for sure, but if you're just looking reading for gist or reading for specific information, then you can just take chunks of paragraphs, chunks or a couple of paragraphs at a time, and I think that's enough. So be aware of how much text you're doing. In the reading lessons that I'll be releasing by the end of this month, October 2016, probably keeping it, I'll have both the full text available, but in terms of what I would give you, this is about as much that I would put on any exercise slide at a time. Otherwise, I think it can become overwhelming, and you want to keep motivation up when you're teaching reading skills. Selecting options are really interesting. Again, there's going to be paraphrasing, lots of information to read in the question. So students really need to read the instruction. They need to be underlining keywords, and they need to think about how this might be paraphrased. This kind of question doesn't appear that often in the practice tests. I can't remember whether I actually had it in the IELTS test that I sat, but here what the student needs to do is there are two sets of information. The opinions, it was a research, for example, well, this would have been a presentation of research on a particular field. In a particular field, you've got three scientists on the right in the box, and they need to be matched with their opinions, or whoever said the or made the statements on the left. It's quite a challenging exercise, actually. So you want to be finding, when students are going through reading tests, they are underlining keywords. Read the questions, underline the keywords, and that will help them to go through and identify this kind of information. Speaking is an interesting one. There are three parts to the speaking section. It's one where students may feel the most confident with, but there are a couple of things I'll point out. They need to be using natural language. If your student is still coming with you with fine, thanks, and you, okay, you've got to get rid of that before the IELTS exam. IELTS is probably the most objective test I've ever seen, but the reality is you are sitting in front of a human being who has seen hundreds and hundreds of thousands of candidates come through the door, and I just don't think it makes a very good impression if you sit down and, you know, it just stumbles out in that staccato. Yeah, fine, thanks, and you. Pronunciation doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure, if you know the student sitting the test in Australia, I'm not saying the student has to sit down and say, "G'day, mate." It would be inappropriate, but do something that comes natural. Get those first few things to come out naturally, because the student will feel more comfortable about it. It doesn't have to be rigid and formal. Of course, nervousness is going to account for a few of these things, but the examiner's a human being. They're going to know immediately, oh, okay, off we go again. All right, that's my feeling on that. I'm sure they're extremely objective, but I think first impressions count, let's face it. Register. You do want students, and this is where I think native speakers, I've heard, make a lot of mistakes, is they get a little bit too casual in the exam. So not too informal. You know, you need to be confident. It's not a job interview, and the examiner is not going to mark you as such. You're also not having to show that you're the smartest person that they will see that day, or the most knowledgeable on any topic. What they want is that you can express an opinion, and that you're able to give some, you know, respond to yes/no questions and to information questions. You can ask for the question to be repeated. My understanding is they will not, they'll actually repeat the question. They will not paraphrase it. That's my understanding. I hope I haven't got that wrong. So questions can be repeated. It's okay. They're not going to mark you down for it, but you won't get it paraphrased. It will come back exactly as you heard it the first time. Whilst I've said previously I don't teach grammar and vocabulary with IELTS, I will say that when it comes to the speaking exams, I make a few allowances here. It's really important that the student at this point can express preferences, likes and dislikes. This is such basic English that if your student hasn't got this right, it's something that you need to do. Either you've got a student who's under B1, that's fine, but make sure that they can express preferences, likes and dislikes with some kind of fluency, because it really is required in the test. Also make sure they can express conditional sentences and phrases. Teach the third conditionals. There are other ways of expressing condition also in English, but just make sure that they can express something in a hypothetical, about a hypothetical situation, because it will be asked. Cue cards. Use them. You can actually reproduce the authentic situation in an IELTS exam. There's no reason that you shouldn't have 50 cue cards that you have used with your students over and over again, because they will always need to do a very similar thing, describing a place, describing an activity. It's pretty basic stuff, actually. Part 3 is where the students will become unnerved a little bit. It's only about 3 or 4 minutes, but this will be where the student needs to express a point of view or an opinion. You don't need to be an expert on the topic, but there will be some language, I think, in my opinion, I would say that, etc. But the question itself will be taken from the examiner by the last thing that you have spoken about on the cue card. The question will come from there, and then it will delve in a little bit deeper. Okay, when the student says to you, I only need help with writing, you're the teacher. You have to know best here, and in my opinion, a good IELTS teacher is going to look at all 4 competencies. They are complementary, and when a student thinks they know best, I think you need to take the upper hand with them. Of course, they're paying you at the end of the day, but I don't think you're doing your job unless you're teaching all 4 of the skills. And just concentrating on writing, I think, is it doesn't really assist the student in the end. I think reading and writing are particularly well linked, but all of them. So that's my opinion there. I can read graphs and diagrams easily. As I mentioned before, we all can, but can you write or follow the directions when somebody else is explaining or talking about them? I don't think that question will be in the exam. The alarm bells as an IELTS teacher should go off. You just can't predict. I went through actually a couple of IELTS books published and looked at the question types. There is a preference for certain question types, but you just don't know what's going to appear on the day, and there would be nothing worse than coming across a question type that you've just simply ignored. So make sure you cover all of them, and there are a lot. I can't understand the Australian accent. Well, that's not my problem, it's your problem. IELTS is a great standardized test. It teaches listening skills, and that doesn't mean that you can understand people in your hometown or even the culture in which you live. Each accent is given the same weighting, and is important as a student and a teacher in the 21st century that you don't place a cultural value or impose your values on the student. The student has to be exposed to the language as it exists on the planet in 2016. If you can't understand it, then you have a problem, okay? You don't, as I said before, you don't need to, and I'm not talking about the Australian accent here, I'm talking about all of the accents, all of the standard accents that are used in IELTS. You have to be able to recognize them, and there's just so much online stuff out there now that's free that you can stream. There's just no excuse for the student not to be putting in some effort there, and you as the teacher helping them to do it. I don't like to speak in front of other people. I don't know how much you can do about this, but you're going to have to sort that out with the student, okay? If you don't like to speak in front of other people, you're going to have some difficulty in the speaking exam. And whilst it's not necessarily the easiest thing to teach confidence, I think as a teacher, if you build up a great rapport with the student, you can do it. They have to be confident when they sit down. You just simply can't be nervous in the speaking exam, or you're going to make a lot of mistakes that you wouldn't normally do. I'm not sure how many lessons I can afford at the moment. If you ever get this question, you need to question how far you really want to go with this student. I would say that the student knows that they're going to be sitting an exam. They certainly know the cost of the exam, and they're probably going to know their international student fees if they get in with the IELTS exam and then are accepted by that university. If a student can't afford lessons with you at the moment, I would leave it there. As I said, I think teachers should be valuing the work that they provide for students, and you should not be giving this away for a discounted, or certainly not free, unless that's your thing. I also don't believe that people value things over the short to even midterm when they're given away free. And if people pay for physics and physics and math tutoring, then they can also pay for something like this for sure. Okay, so where do you start? If the student's new with you, I would suggest that you go with a placement test. It's really good to get, as I said, those vocabulary, find out what those vocabulary and grammar issues are at the start, and keep them aside and deal with them as and when you're going through IELTS things, sorry, not in the same IELTS lesson if you're teaching an IELTS skill, but keep them aside and go through perhaps the phrasal verbs or the conditionals to back all of that up. You can use our placement test, by the way. We have one online. That at the moment is open to anybody if you're on the site, so you don't even need to be a subscriber. You'd have to sign up to the site, but then you can use it at the moment. It's unlimited for prospective and new students. I'll say it again, don't offer a free trial for IELTS. Just, you're worth it as a teacher. If you've looked at it and you've done some study here as a teacher, and you feel confident with it, make sure there's some value for the student there as well, and for yourself. Be extremely clear about what you're offering. Are you really going to grade work outside of lessons and respond to emails on the weekend? The reason I say that is, as I've said, in my opinion, IELTS students are extremely motivated. They have an end date and they're often under pressure. They expect quite a lot out of you, or some of them will. And I'm not saying it's unreasonable of them to think that, but you need to be very clear about how, what the deal is before you decide to take the student on. Cover all 4 skills. I've said enough about it. They are certainly complementary. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact us. I'm James at Off2Class.com. My co-founder is Chris. You can get him at Chris at Off2Class. Certainly he's the expert when it comes to setting you up if you want to come onto Off2Class as a school, or you need a custom package, or the general user experience. You can get in contact with me for content, or to give me any feedback, whether that's good or bad, about the webinar. And our website, Off2Class.com. I'm just going to go there now, but before I finish there, I just want to let you know one of the things you can do on our site is you can actually brand it with your own logo. So when I go onto the site in a minute, you'll see that it's branded with Off2Class because it's the Off2Class site. But we actually allow you, as your own little company, to put your logo where you see Off2Class there. So when the student logs in, it will then say, I don't know, James is teaching. And you can just get a nice little logo, and it will also appear for the student when they log into the site to do pick up their homework activities and so forth. So it's normally $150. It's a one-off payment that you make, so that's aside from the subscription. So this month we're offering 20% off, so that's just for the next 48 hours. All you need to use is this promo code, so when you go in and you want to purchase that, you can go into your account page, and the pricing will automatically adjust once you put the promotion code in. All right, so I'm going to go back now and give you a very brief presentation of Off2Class. So this is a site that we started when our pain point as an online teacher was we can't find good online lessons, or we can't find good content to use in an online environment, certainly with sharing screens, and also for whiteboards. These days in 2016, I think a textbook that has just been converted to a PDF or an online environment, often they just don't cut it. And I think you need to be presenting certain amounts of information. They need to be bright, they need to be image heavy, and they have to look good to digital natives. We're now entering a period where people who are even 20 years old or older have always used digital products, and so things have to look really good for them when they're using on stuff on screen. Also, Off2Class, what we've been very careful with is it works on everything, so you can use it, it's browser based, so you can use it on any phone, on any tablet, on any browser, on any laptop. It works everywhere, so it's great for students to complete their homework. If you want to teach on a tablet or flip it onto the whiteboard and you've got your internet connection, it works in every format. We've been very careful about that. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. So we have a placement test that I mentioned before. You can assign that. You can assign it to a prospective student. And what I'll do here today is I'm just going to assign it. Here we go to Usla. And that will get sent. That gets sent. It's as simple as that to my new student. You can have a look at the sample questions here. There will be 100 questions that are pulled from 850 in the bank, so they are selected randomly, although they always start at the simplest A1 level and go up to C1 in CEFR. Student has 5 choices generally. One of them is always I don't know. So once the student completes that, the results are submitted automatically, and then you can go in and check the results. I'm going to do that here now. So if I go into the student management panel and I go into my student, you can actually see the placement test results come up here. There's a nice graphic display, and of the 100 questions, you can see green was where the student, in this case a female, got them right. She selected I don't know for 2 of them, and a few she got incorrect. So underneath we give a proficiency level, what we estimate the student's CEFR is. And then underneath is a gap analysis. So for every question that was answered incorrectly, we give you the question the student answered the right answer, but best of all, we give you the lesson that you can really load. Now, Usla is a good student. I assume that she really doesn't have problems with possessive adjectives, but it's a good place for me to start and check. After all, she's Turkish and they don't use, actually no, possessive adjectives, yes, there's no different, male and female can be a problem for Turkish students. So this could be an issue that she still has as a C1 student down in A1, and it might be one of those fossilized errors you want to look at and get rid of, if you can. Also, the questions to which students did not provide an answer. So all of those have links on them. And if you're subscribed to our site, you can go in and all I need to do, for example, let's say she has problems, okay, she may have an issue with mixed conditionals. It will automatically ask me if I want to enroll her, which I'm going to do today, if I were teaching her. And this is actually now what our lessons look like. So this is a grammar lesson. I'm going to get rid of the teacher notes and they have popped up. Okay, but I'm just going to bring them back in. Although I wouldn't normally use the teacher notes, I want you to see them because we've put them in here for you as the teacher. I've tried to provide objectives. I've tried to make the notes helpful rather than patronizing and condescending. But if you are an inexperienced teacher, I hope that I've put in ideas that will help you to concept check, to elicit information, to promote authentic speech. And of course, whenever there is on the lesson itself, hopefully we're going to come to, here we go, I actually give you the answers, or in some cases, example answers. English being the beast that it is, there's often more than one example available. So here you've got some example answers because contractions could actually be possible here as well, and the student would obviously not be incorrect. Most of the lessons, I'm going to pop the notes out again to show you how it looks to the student. Okay, so if you were sharing the screen, you'd have the notes popped out and I could still see them on my side. Here, nice and bright, we tend to use images. There is a bit of repetition. You're the teacher, make sure you're drawing on the screen and using the tools that are available for you. You can be, I don't know what I'd be doing here, but I'm just giving you an example of how drawing on the screen can be very good to focus students, but you can use them for the gap fills, etc. Grammar presentations, there'll be matching activities, there'll be gap fills I've already expressed, and then hopefully lots and lots of repetition and image heavy stuff at the end. I'll just let you know as well, we are now putting in, or we have, we're trialing, if I double clicked, oh sorry, if I didn't quite want to do that, but I can double click, for example, conditionals, and I can now look this up in the dictionary. Oh, sorry, that didn't work. Okay, probably because I picked a plural form. So I can pick the word hungry and then look this up in the dictionary. Here we go. All right, or you can even image search. All right, there we go. Pretty standard, comes out. So picture is definitely worth 1,000 words. It's a great teaching tool as well. Back to the classroom, sorry, there you go. We've also got Google Translate if I wanted to quickly pop that into, let me see, German, hopefully, oh yeah, that one definitely worked. All right, and so on. So you can, we're even looking at this so that in the future, not only will you be able to edit the text that's in our lessons, we're going to actually allow you to start uploading your own, and it truly becomes interactive. So that's coming, but I've got the beta version at the moment. When you get to the end of the lesson, hopefully it's been quite good for you. You've used the teacher notes, etc. Okay, all of the lessons have a homework activity attached, which can be, when you close this lesson, it will ask you if you want to send the homework to the enrolled student. This is what the homework looks like if you'd like to preview it. I always think it's very good to preview homework with students because it takes away the reason I didn't receive the homework or I didn't know what to do. A, all of this is delivered electronically and online, so there's no excuse. And B, if you've gone through if you've gone through the first couple of questions, the student knows it's there and they know, they've said to you, you've concept checked that they know what to do and understood the instruction, you're pretty much free to get them to do it. So you can, it's pretty for students who are familiar with online, it'll be very easy for them to complete the homework. Gap fills here. Hopefully in this one also there might be some free text. There we go. There's some free text here as well. You expect the students to start writing their own materials. There'll be a summary of the lesson that's delivered to them. So there we go, just the explanations and the examples. The exercises from the lesson do not appear in the student summary. The reason we don't give them the entire summary is that if we give them everything that you have access to, after a few weeks, like any student, they're going to say, this could be self-study. What's the point of having a teacher? So we give them some, but we hope that you've done your work and that you've valued you've shown your value as the teacher. So that's the reason we give the students only the summary slides. Okay, I'll come back here. I think I'm going to close the classroom. As I said, I can send the homework. I'm not going to send it in this case, but it normally would send an email to the student. They can then just log into the classroom and do it. So the student would log in the profile as normal. And I'm just going to quickly, briefly show you here, okay, when you're searching for lessons. So if you're going to be teaching conditionals, you can use that. All right, it'll bring it all up for you. We've tagged the lessons quite heavily. You can also deselect the levels and then look, I'm just looking for an A2 and a B1 or elementary and pre-intermediate. It will highlight the lessons that are, we believe, that should be okay for you. All of the leveling is relative. It's very, very hard. A beginner in China may not be the same as a beginner in the United States. I just don't know. They're relative terms. They're never going to get this 100% correct, but we go with the CEFR levels. As I mentioned, placement test here, we've got listening activities. You'll need to check your audio. We think they're pretty good. Speaking activities for promoting authentic speech. Reading's important, and we think we've done a good job with managing text size here. IELTS, as you can see, listening, writing and speaking, the gap in the middle, reading, will be out by the end of October 2016, so I've got a month to get those done. Then we've got business English, lots of idioms, vocabularies, and lots of grammar stuff there. So come on if you want. There's a 30-day trial for users. You will have access to about 140 of the 540 lessons currently on the site. There should be 550, as I said, by the end of next month. We're adding all the time. And that's pretty much it. So as I said, feel free to get in contact with either myself, James, or my co-founder, Chris, at Off2Class.com. And thank you very much for your time. I hope it was informative for you. Thanks again.